Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here then hi, my name is Miss Paris and I'm a newly qualified primary school teacher here in the UK. Today is going to be full of tips on how you can reduce your workload when it comes to marking. Now, marking is a large task that takes up a lot of time for teachers and trainee teachers, so hopefully these, I don't want to say hacks because they're not hacks, but they're different ways of marking, different ways of providing feedback that also work to reduce the amount of time that you spend on marking. Now, obviously, I'm going to put a disclaimer straight away out there. Marking really depends on the school. So before you listen to these tips and think, oh my goodness, that's amazing, I'm going to implement that, check your placement or your school's marking policy to see if this fits in line with that. Without further ado, also apologies for the clothing. It's kind of an admin-y day, filling out paperwork stuff, so I also thought with the chilly weather, I'm just gonna stay comfy. That's my priority. Okay, tip number one is to self-assess. Why does it have to be you assessing it? Let the children in front of you see what they got right or wrong, and in that moment they might think, okay, well, why did I get that wrong? I don't get it. And they can ask you questions. It's so much better than you marking it, not getting the opportunity to revisit it, and then maybe in future them making the same mistake because they didn't look over it, they didn't ask you questions about it. What was the point then? So give them the opportunity to self-assess. I got that wrong. Okay, why did I get that wrong? How could I improve that next time? Maybe where did I go wrong? Do I not understand and need to ask a teacher a question? Or did I get that right? Excellent, I know what I'm doing, I'm happy with what I'm doing. And then they can move on. Self-assessing as well as peer assessing, this works with both. In order for them to know the answers, you could do this in several different ways. If it's something like a one word or one number answer or a spelling test, you could read out the spellings, you know, each letter, or read out the numbers, and they can just tick or highlight whatever their policy is. You could alternatively, if it's not too many questions, put the answers up on the board and they can just tick or cross dot as they go. And with peer assessing, if it doesn't really quite work to put the answers on the board or for you to verbally say the answers, what you could also get them to do is leave a little feedback. Again, this depends on your policy, so I don't want to generalise, but you could say something like, okay, leave 2 ticks and maybe a star to improve on, or something like that, you know, so they're almost doing the feedback. This is definitely a good way to get some good feedback, give the children opportunity to reflect and to make changes without putting all the workload on you. My third tip, especially when you're going through a maths task or something that's easy to mark, just go through the first few when you start. So give them maybe 10 minutes if they have to work through the first 5, 10 questions or maybe 1-2 challenges. Just stop them after a few minutes and go, let's just mark number 1 to see how we're all doing or if we all understand. Okay, and then if there's children that got that wrong, maybe you could work with them or maybe see if they need extra support. Then if there's still time, go through number 2 or number 3. Or you could give them a longer amount of time, go through the first 10. 10 times by 30 children, that's already 300 questions done for you. And you haven't taken any time out of planning time or assessment time or anything else. So that's also a really easy thing to do. It also allows them to kind of have a little brain break, get back to it. Or if they're getting it wrong, it allows them to stop and reflect and think, okay, I've got them all wrong, I need to think about this again, or maybe ask a question because I don't know what I'm doing. My tip number 4 is a marking station. I never came across this actually until my current position. Some schools are doing it, some aren't doing it anymore due to COVID. It really depends on the school situation, how much space you have in a class, etc. But a marking station is an area where whatever worksheets you're working on, there's a copy of it and they have all the answers. So before a child can move on to the next question or the next challenge or the next worksheet, they have to go to that marking station, mark the work, and then they can go back. If they've got it all right, then they can get the next sheet. If they don't, then they need to go over it and try and correct it. This is really good because sometimes when you're overwhelmed or you're working with another group and people keep saying, oh, I'm done, I'm done, I'm done, it's really tempted to just say, oh, take the next sheet then, or start the challenge, but you don't know if they've actually got it right. If they've got them all wrong or they've only got one right, and you're just saying, yeah, go ahead, try the trickier ones, actually it's kind of wasting their time, it's not benefiting them, and it's kind of hindering their progress because they're not able to look over and improve what they have done. So a marking station can be really useful. It also avoids an influx or a queue of people coming your way. Marking stations can be really, really useful, and I think it's particularly good if there are some children that always finish really, really quickly or they often get things right. It allows them to go and do that without kind of disrupting you if you're helping somebody else, or if you're still doing another input with a cutoff group, for example. Number 5 is live mark. So I don't know why, but at least for me, there was this misconception as a trainee that you had to take all the books home at the end of the lesson or mark all the books at the end of the lesson. You can mark as you go. You kind of go around and have a look at how the child's doing. So there's nothing stopping you from giving them a tick here or saying, oh, just check this one, coming back to it later and seeing if they've corrected it and then ticking it again. It also, you would be surprised how good it feels, because then afterwards when you look at the book, you're like, oh, I've already done that one. Oh, I've already done that one. Awesome. And there might be 10, 20, 15, however many already done. And actually, even without meaning to, even just doing what you would normally do by walking around the class and seeing how everyone is doing, you've got half of that done. That also applies for your TA. If you can both do 15, so walking around the class, trying to tick here and there, and you do 15 each, that is your whole lesson potentially done. Maybe apart from writing some deep dive comments, that kind of thing. But already that would significantly reduce your workload. Linked to that point, kind of live marking, is oral feedback, especially with longer pieces of writing. Sometimes you are expected, and if you are expected, then sadly you still have to do it. But sometimes it's just teachers that want to give feedback. So we kind of say, oh, maybe try and add this next time, or could you start your sentence with a fronted adverbial, or don't forget your full stop at the end of a sentence, for example, in earlier Key Stage 1. Well, rather than doing that, when you are walking around and doing that live marking, why don't you give them that oral feedback? Say, oh, what do we need at the end of a sentence? Or could we make that sentence starter more interesting than but or and? Because then children, again, can do it there in the moment. There is no point you writing lovely feedback, doing maybe 2-3 comments per child times by 30 children for one lesson, and then them never actually seeing that feedback. Or you don't have the time to allow them to go over and improve that paragraph, sentence, essay, whatever it is. What is the point? Who are you doing it for then? It really does have to be about the children. Even though there's an expectation to mark, you have to do it with the children's progress in mind. So sometimes what is best is giving a tick or a little highlight here and there, and then giving them the feedback orally. It saves you time writing it. They can react straight away to it, and they can also find out how to improve that sentence. So in the next paragraph or the next few sentences that they're going to write as you move on to the rest of the class, they can already work on those things. My 7th tip, I think, is about asking the children to kind of, it's not necessarily self-assess, but maybe it is. I'm not really sure how you would define this one, but ask the children to highlight things or underline with a ruler, whatever your policy is, things that link to the success criteria. So if you open your book and there is already loads of stuff highlighted, let's say your LI was to use adjectives, and they have already underlined all of their adjectives, you can see in a piece of work how many times they have underlined something, and you can say, okay, I think they have met the success criteria. So straight away, that saves you a ton of work. If a child hasn't been able to do that, or there's nothing on their page, check just in case they forgot to assess themselves. But if they haven't, then they haven't met the learning intention. So rather than going through having to read every single piece of writing, obviously try anyway, especially if it's kind of small paragraphs, you can read that. But if there is loads of stuff on their page, and check that they actually did it correctly, then you can highlight the learning intention. If they didn't, then they haven't met the learning intention, and that's something that you can easily comment at the bottom. But like with anything, if you're reading a journal article and already the main parts are highlighted for you, you'll get through it a lot quicker. And I also think it makes children conscious. It gives them that responsibility towards their own learning, which is TS2, I'm not sure which letter, but TS2, to actually look over and think, okay, have I actually put adjectives in it? Or have I used conjunctions? Or have I used expanded noun phrases? This allows them to really identify if they are doing the right thing. If they haven't, and they've written a paragraph, and then you might just say as a reminder to the class, don't forget to highlight your adjectives or whatever it is, they might go, oh, okay, I need to quickly do that. Rather than if you didn't remind them, they weren't doing that, you open the books and they haven't done a single adjective, you kind of think, oh, well, that was kind of a wasted opportunity. Tip number 8 is about whole class feedback. So of course you always want to personalize your feedback, but if you notice and you've looked at maybe 10 children's work of different abilities and you keep noticing the same trends, then why not just stop the class, pause them for 10 seconds and just say, don't forget to do this, or I've seen a lot of people haven't included da-da-da. Can you add that? Can you make sure that you've got one already in your sentence or your paragraph? If so, can you highlight it so I can see it easily? See, so linking several different mark things there. But also, another way a whole class feedback could work is that after you have marked everything, rather than leaving several comments per child, you can kind of create maybe a PowerPoint slide or a little handout of the main pieces of feedback that you would have given. So if you saw loads of children who forgot capital letters for their places or proper nouns, that kind of thing, then you could put that as a bullet point. Of course it might not apply to some children, but if it applies to maybe 50% or more, definitely write that down. So you could just tell everyone. For those that already did it, it's a reminder anyway, and for those that didn't, they're like, oh yeah, okay, I didn't do that, and then they can go over it. If you are telling the whole class feedback, it's another way to avoid that tendency to make nice comments and the children never look back on it because they haven't been told to, or they don't have the time, or yeah, I mean, what's the point then? Whereas if you give whole class feedback, everyone hears it, it's a good reminder, it's a good kind of hint to say, okay, maybe check, did you do this? Whole class feedback is a really useful tool to do that. It takes, what, 10 minutes, maybe even less, 5, 2 minutes to summarize different points that you can give to the class, and it's also a good indication of where they are kind of at in their writing or maths and what they can do next time to improve. Tip number 9 is about symbols or abbreviations. I know that lots of schools have different things. In the 3 schools I've been in, they've already done lots of different systems, but I've sometimes seen spellings kind of abbreviated as SP with a circle around it, or if somebody works independently, you put an I and circle it, TA and circle it, all that kind of stuff. You could do it for group work or pair work or peer aided. All of these kind of things, you can just summarize it, but it allows you to see things quicker. So, okay, these 5 children got it, but they did work with a TA. Let's see if they can maybe do it with a scaffold rather than a TA supporting them as a group, that kind of thing. You could also do the same with corrections. 2 lines could indicate a new paragraph. You could do kind of one of those upward arrow things that show you, oh, you're missing a word. If you introduce something new, make sure you train your class in it, otherwise they have no idea what you mean. But this is just another way of saving you time. Rather than saying, what word is missing from this sentence, or proofread your sentence to see if it makes sense, you could just put an arrow, or you could put the line for a new paragraph, SP for spelling. Just try and make use of this as much as possible, because there is nothing worse than kind of writing these long-winded things, again, that they just don't read and they can't improve on. There's just no point. My final tip, and this is kind of more related to assessments, but it could work with anything really, particularly with the current climate of blended learning, or some children doing home learning only, some children are at school, whole bubbles are at home. It's chaotic. So if you're training or an NQT, I really feel for you right now. But a good way to minimize the marking when you are doing a assessment, whether it's a summative or a formative assessment, you could use Google Forms. I know they also have a similar type of layout in Microsoft Teams, but basically you can have a test, you can make it multiple choice, or you could you could do it multiple choice, you could ask them to write a sentence, and you can often score this. So at the end, if there's no kind of like paragraphs or open-ended questions like that, they will automatically score it and send you the results for it. So you could easily see some nice data of how children performed in those quizzes or tests. If they are open-ended questions or you require them to write a paragraph, then you will have to see it yourself, but at least it's online and it's something that you can access from anywhere, and it's also nicely condensed. You don't have to take home a bunch of papers, there's no risk of it being lost, etc, etc. So that's another really useful tip that can save you time, because once it's set up, it can be sent to everybody. It can be sent to everybody you want to. There's no printing, there's no photocopying. It's quite easy. So if you haven't checked that out, maybe consider in the future trying to do a Google form, or consider any of the previous things that I mentioned. But I hope that what I said made sense. If you have any additional marking shortcuts or marking tips, then please leave them down below. If not, let me know your marking policy. How does it differ? I'd love to see how it differs to mine. If you enjoyed this video, then give it a thumbs up so YouTube will recommend it to others. Subscribe if you'd like more teaching content, and press the bell to be notified when I upload. I'll see you next time. Have an amazing weekend and a good week. Bye!